make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
QAnon, as it started out, and as it was for most of its existence, is a cult-like conspiracy theory that holds that a military intelligence team is working at the elbow of President Donald Trump to leak cryptic clues to an upcoming purge of the deep state called the Storm. And when the Storm is unveiled, there will be hundreds of thousands of sealed indictments that are opened. There will be mass arrests of the Democratic Party, the Hollywood elite, the banking elite, the globalist establishment, all of whom will then be executed or sent to Guantanamo Bay, and we will live in peace and harmony and prosperity after that for all time.
Hey, faithful politics listeners and viewers, if you are watching on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by the venerable Pastor Josh Bertram, who is our faithful host. How's it going, Josh?
Good. Can you start calling me Bishop or Father or Your Excellency or His Excellency, something like that?
Yes. From here on out, henceforth.
Nice.
This week we are talking to somebody I'm super excited about. Is Mike Rothschild. He is a QAnon expert and is a journalist focused on the intersections between internet culture and politics, as seen through the dark glass of conspiracy theories. Since 2018, he's specialized in examining the QAnon conspiracy cult and is one of the first journalists to reveal its connection to past conspiracy theories and scams. Rothschild's experience has led to us becoming a leading commentator on the subject for New York Times, The Washington Post, and most of the 3-letter media organizations out there. And now he's lending his experience to our 16-letter organization. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you. And you can also refer to me as Your Excellency, Your Highness.
Got it.
Highness, there you go.
Darth is good. Thanks for having me on, guys. Yes, thanks for having me on, guys. I really
no problem.
it.
I did not realize that this episode would contain so much royalty, but hey, let's make it rain with those donations to keep our episode.
Yes.
So Mike, I first question out the gate, because I've had a lot of people ask me, like, are you related to the Rothschild family?
No, I'm not. I have no relation whatsoever to the wealthy dynasty of Frankfurt. But my my next project, yeah, I know. No one is upset more than me about that. My next project is likely going to revolve around that family. So stay tuned
amazing.
for news on that. Yeah.
Can you get into the family dinner somehow by saying you're a long lost nephew or sixth cousin?
I'm some uncle's grandson, try to pull a reverse succession kind of thing, just kind of insinuate myself into the family. Sure.
You're the illegitimate son that finally came back and everyone now recognizes it. I think it's good.
Yeah.
That's so awesome. Well, Mike, yeah. So, so you're sort of the foremost expert on QAnon, and I gotta know. I mean, how does one become an expert in QAnon, and maybe actually before. Even before that, or combined with that, is what the heck is QAnon, and how did you develop expertise in that field?
Sure. It's definitely not something that you can ever plan for or, put in a career outline. I've always been interested in conspiracy theories. Even going back to college, I would listen to the Coast to Coast AM show. And I was always interested in these things as stories. I never believed that the crop circles were put there by aliens, or that the, Area 51 was where the alien ships were, or the, ghosts or any of that stuff. But I appreciated it as storytelling. And I was interested in why people would believe those things. And it's a question that never quite left me. So I started writing about conspiracy theories in 2012, I started blogging for the podcast Skeptoid, and I would write once a week about just some pop culture thing or moral panic or hoax. And I really started to enjoy it. And I realized that I could actually get through to people. I've been doing it for about a year when there was suddenly a really big spike in views for a piece I'd written about this pseudoscience called oil pulling, which is you swish oil around in your mouth and then you spit it out and it supposedly pulls the toxins out of your mouth. That's not how anything works. Your mouth does not carry toxins in it.
Whoa.
But Dr. Oz had done a segment on oil pulling. And so suddenly tens of thousands of people started searching for it on Google, and they found this piece I'd written debunking the whole thing. And I realized, I could actually get through to people. I could maybe make an impact doing this. And I've been very fortunate to be able to do it more and more professionally since then. And during my sort of travels in that world, I stumbled on QAnon. And QAnon, as it started out, and as it was for most of its existence, is a cult-like conspiracy theory that holds that a military intelligence team is working at the elbow of President Donald Trump to leak cryptic clues to an upcoming purge of the deep state called the Storm. And when the Storm is unveiled, there will be hundreds of thousands of sealed indictments that are opened. There will be mass arrests of the Democratic Party, the Hollywood elite, the banking elite, the globalist establishment, all of whom will then be executed or sent to Guantanamo Bay, and we will live in peace and harmony and prosperity after that for all time. So it's a very utopian conspiracy theory, and I think that's the first thing that people really should understand about it, is that this is not accelerationism. This is not trolls who want to watch the world burn. These are people who genuinely believe that there will be a great uplifting of the world that will be carried out through the violent execution of everybody who has kept them down for the past 6 millennia. So that's the first thing that people should really understand about it. At its heart, it's very utopian.
So that's amazing. I mean, honestly, what you just said in those like few words is the most insightful thing I've ever heard to understand QAnon before this time, because I still don't understand it. I understand it better now. But it's like, they have real, like in biblical studies. So I love the Bible and, I'm a pastor. And so I love reading it and its original languages and theology. I'm just a theology nerd. So there's this theology called eschatology, which is from the Greek eschaton, right? Which is like the end of time. So this is all about like this end of times kind of utopian heaven on earth kind of idea. And what do you think? What do you think the Christian influence has been, or religious influence has been on QAnon as a whole? Is it like pushing it forward as like a false theology or ideology, or is it just kind of interspersed in QAnon?
That's a really good question. There's a lot of lip service paid to Christianity in QAnon. You will get a lot of very apocalyptic Bible quotes. You get a lot of the quote from Ephesians, the armor of God. That's a big concept in QAnon. These people believe that they are divinely chosen, that they are fighting on behalf of a president who was ordained by God and the generals to sweep away the Babylonian death cult that's run the world for 5,000 years. It's very messianic. You get a lot of Bible quotes. You get a lot of sort of catchphrases like God wins in the end. It's very almost holy war kind of stuff. And it's what makes QAnon so compelling to the people who believe it. This isn't trolling. This isn't, hey, we're going to go online and own the libs. These people truly believe that they are patriotic, godly soldiers fighting against the minions of Satan. This isn't just political differences. This is This is like a Christian version of jihad in a lot of ways. And it's what makes it so hard to get people out of this, because who wants to stop doing that? Who wants to give up on the fight between good and evil? Doesn't that make you evil if you give up on good? It's very holy war stuff. It's very compelling.
How did Q actually start? I mean, like, was there one singular person that, came up with this great idea and started it, or was it more like organically grown? Like, how did it come to be?
Sure, and there's still a lot of debate about this, and we still don't actually know for 100% certainty who made the first posts on 4chan, who engineered the Q's jump from 4chan to 8chan in December, who was writing the posts up at the end. There's a lot of ideas that are thrown around. Some of them are terrible, some of them are pretty compelling. But it started on 4chan, on the poll board, which is a very, very notorious troll haven. I don't recommend anybody ever go there. But it started off as this series of anonymous posts positing that there was going to be a mass arrest of the Clinton cabal. And the first Q drop is actually a really good case study of why this took off so quickly. It posits that Hillary Clinton is going to be arrested on November 3rd, 2017, that there will be National Guard and Marine units called up to quell the riots that will take place, and that there is a plan to carry all of this out. And the arrests will take place in stages, and you will know that this is going on because there will be troops in the streets, and Donald Trump will make an announcement over Twitter. And all of this really was based on what had happened a few weeks earlier, which is Trump had a dinner of high-ranking military officers and their spouses. And they're all standing there. The media's taking pictures. Everybody looks very regal. And he starts talking about, what this could be? This could be the calm before the storm. And he's doing it in that kind of like low-key, almost muttered way where he's not really talking to anybody. He's almost sort of talking to himself. And of course, the media is like, what storm, Mr. President? What are you talking about? Because when you're standing in a room full of high-ranking military officers and you're talking about the calm before the storm, people get a little bit concerned.
Yeah.
Could this be something about North Korea, ISIS, Afghanistan, whatever? And, nobody knew. Nobody had any idea what he was talking about. I don't know if he knew what he was talking about. But a few weeks later, you get this idea that the storm is not going to be a military operation, but going to be a military intelligence operation, arresting all of these awful people. And the first awful person that's going to be arrested is Hillary Clinton. So there had been these 4chan anons before, sort of anonymous accounts that were doling out little bits of intelligence or insider gossip. Probably not real, probably just more 4chan trolling. But there was already a tradition of believing anonymous truth tellers. So Q was just one more of these. They just happened to be telling a story that a lot of people on this very anti-Clinton 4chan board really wanted to be true. So that's really where it started, with just this hopeful idea that the worst person in American history was going to finally get what was coming to her.
That's
go ahead,
amazing,
Josh.
man. So as I'm hearing you talk, I'm realizing like this is like way more legitimate than I even thought, even to this moment. Legitimate being like people like this is like a movement similar to something you would have seen maybe in the days of Jesus, where there were like uprisings planned to go against the Roman government, to try to bring freedom, to the Jewish nation and herald in this Messiah. Like people are really believing this. And I guess my question, so I was taught, and I had to really learn critical thinking. I actually wasn't taught it, except implicitly, maybe by osmosis, but I had to seek it and learn it through books specifically on it, through, that would talk about the scientific method, but even more fundamentally, the ideas of critical thinking and reasoning and logic and using, finding data and what to do with data. And I guess my question is, how is it that you think that people could believe this? Like, where are they getting the data? Like, what are they seeing that I'm not seeing? What data is there? Like, are there documents? Have they seen them? Are there like, is there some kind of proof? If there isn't, what do you think explains this phenomenon at this time?
Yeah, and if I can ask a follow-up to that too, it's like at the introduction, you explained what QAnon was very eloquently, and like Josh said, probably better than I've ever heard it explained before. But there's not like I don't know. I mean, there are books. Like I actually bought a book. Like I'm probably flagged on an FBI watch list now or something like that, just to read up on it. But there's not like a website to find out what it is. I mean, like, and I equate it to like Antifa. Like you can't go to Antifa.org and find out who Antifa is. And if you do, it's actually really funny. I did it last night just to make sure that you really can't go to Antifa.org. but like to Josh's point, like how do people know the stuff that you just mentioned in your introduction about what Q is?
Sure. Well, the people who believe that Q is real, they want to believe it. It is a matter of it explaining things that they've already believed, but articulating them in a new way. So it explains why these globalist families run the world. It explains why the Clintons get away with everything. It explains why Trump often seemed so befuddled as president. It was all on purpose. It was all part of the plan. When he was losing, he was actually winning bigger than you could possibly imagine. You carry that forward a little bit, it explains why he lost the 2020 election. Well, he lost because he had to lose to prove that the corruption was as deep as it went. He'll come back as president when it's time to reveal the winning. And of course, you ask yourself, well, why didn't he just win again? Wouldn't have that been easier? But they don't ask themselves simple questions like that. The proof idea is actually very important in QAnon, and you would think that how could there possibly be any proof that this is real? They've created it themselves. And I talk about this in the book quite a bit. There is a whole genre of internet memes called Q proofs, and they do just that. They prove, in quotes, that Q is real. And they do it by tying Q drops to Trump tweets, to events in the news, to things going on in daily life. So what will happen is Trump would have tweeted something, maybe using a typo in a certain way. And then the Q believers, the Q bakers, as they call themselves, the people who decode all of this stuff, will tie the timing of Trump's tweet to the timing of a Q drop and the language of a Q drop. So there's a proof that I use in the book where Q supposedly predicted the U.S. strike against the Assad regime in Syria and tied that to the timing of a Trump tweet talking about our nice and brand new missiles. And there was a misspelling in the tweet, and there were some codes in the Q drop that if you tie that back to the timing of the tweet, it's total nonsense. It is the definition of red string on a corkboard waving your arms. It doesn't mean anything. And I looked, and what I did was I actually looked at the language of the Q drop and what the code meant. The code doesn't mean anything. It is literally somebody banging on a keyboard. You can tell, right hand, left hand, going back and forth with the letters. It means nothing. But if you want to believe that this is real, if you want to believe that Trump and Q are working together, you will work backwards. You'll do what we call retconning. You'll retroactively bring that into the continuity to make it all fit together. To the outside world, it looks like the ravings of an insane person. But if you are in the in-group, if you speak the language, you know exactly what it means. And not only do you know what it means, you know that it is Trump signaling to you personally that everything will be okay. And that kind of like direct access to what the president is thinking and what these military intelligence honchos are thinking, that lets you feel like you know what's going on and you're special and you are being spoken to and you are part of the plan. And that's really what it is. It's the feeling of I'm special, I'm important, what I do matters. And that is very powerful, and it's very hard for people to pull back on that.
Now, for those listening or watching, number one, I can't recommend your book enough. And one of the things that I found the most useful in your book was that you actually have like a dictionary of terms, and some of the terms that you've used here that, like, if you're not kind of steeped in that, environment, would seem very, very unfamiliar, uncommon. It'd be like a different language. It'd be like me trying to, I don't know, teach my mom about Twitter or something like that. So make sure you guys check out the book for sure. But on that same vein about definition, so like, what is Q? Like, what does Q represent? So I can gather that the Anon is probably anonymous, but what's the significance of Q?
Sure. And again, like a lot of this stuff, there are a number of different theories. So the Q clearance is a term that got thrown around a lot early on in Q. And Q clearance is a real thing. It's a Department of Energy designation that means you have access to certain information about nuclear power plants and nuclear weapons. It's not that special. It's not secretive. My neighbor had Q clearance for a while as a contractor. It's not shocking that people have this. It has nothing to do with the Department of Defense. It has nothing to do with classified information. The idea that Q clearance is somehow some kind of Department of Defense watchword that the greatest secrets of the nation, that probably came from the early 90s conspiracy theory book, Behold a Pale Horse. That's a book that gets thrown around quite a bit in far-right circles. It's a mess as a book. It's like barely readable, but it's very important in that world. So that term was thrown around in that book. It later got repurposed in an episode of the show Archer that came out around the time that Q started making drops. It's a very reasonable assumption that whoever was making those the posts pulled it either from the Archer episode or pulled it from Behold a Pale Horse. They may have just pulled it out of, hey, this is a real thing and it sounds cool. You never quite know with QAnon. Like, where did they get it? How did they come to it? And it starts to not matter because you can't really prove it. But the Q clearance is real enough so that you can point to it and go, well, Q clearance is real. Why doesn't that mean the rest of it is real? So it's just real enough to give it the veneer of actually being a real thing.
Got it. So what about the players? Like, who are the major spokespeople for Q, and what's the deal with like JFK and lizard people?
So this is one of the really important parts of Q. Q is one player in this game. And if you only understand the Q drops, you're missing a lot of it. Because a lot of the major concepts in Q don't come from Q. They come from the sort of the 4chan swamp, or they come from specific influencers in this world. And if you start to read more about Q, if you read the book and you start to stumble on certain names a lot, these kind of decoder, interpreter, grifter types. Praying medic is one of them, is this sort of self-taught divine healer who was making heal yourself through God videos and getting a couple thousand views. Then he stumbled on QAnon and he became a superstar and was writing self-published books and podcasts and like really turned this into a grift industry. There's other names that you'll see a lot. One guy is In the Matrix, is this dude who lives with his mom in Florida. This guy, Jordan Sather, who is also a big proponent of the secret space program conspiracy theory, and also has a website where he sells like medical bleach and stuff like that. You get a lot of people who realized that this was a very, very lucrative industry that they could jump into while also nursing their own conspiratorial beliefs. And I think it's really important to point out that the people who are really deep into this world, this is not an act for them. This is not just a giant con. They don't, hang up from their popular podcasts and go, ha ha ha, we fleeced them this time. This is real to them. Who knows how much of the minutia they believe, but this is not an act. This is who they are. And this is just an extension of it that is able to monetize it very easily. So there's a whole layer of disciples, you could say, that are kind of underneath Q, who decode the posts, who make the content, who make the merchandise, and who are a much more acceptable public face of Q, because the Q promoters very early on realized that they didn't want people going to places like 4chan and 8chan, because they're horrible places. They're full of anti-Semitism. They're full of racism. They're full of just horribly graphic memes. You look at that stuff and you go, I don't want any part of this. But if you read this stuff on a Twitter thread or a Reddit thread or in a video with really slick production values, it takes on a patina of legitimacy. So understanding the Q influencer community is really just as important as understanding the Q drops themselves.
Wow, man. There's so many questions that are rolling around in my head. I mean, this is absolutely fascinating. So I have two questions, and I'll say them both, but I'll kind of, if you can answer them both in the same thing, that's fine. Or I'll kind of try to address it after you finish an answer. So I hear this phrase, or at least in some of my reading, I heard the phrase, people would say, do your own research. So it was all about basically with the assumption, if you do your research, you're going to find out that this is true. Basically, you're all just patsies. You're on you're puppets on a marionette or sheep being led to the slaughter, and you're just a slave to the media. They just, whatever they tell you, that's what you believe. If they tell you it's true, it's true. If they tell you it's wrong, it's wrong. They tell you what to like, not like, who to hate, all that stuff, what things to believe and what not to believe. The liberal media in particular. So I've been doing a lot of reading on research and what real research is. And research is a word that's thrown around, right? But real research, or maybe I should say technical research, or what it's meant in the, in academic circles as you're looking at it, very well known, very well trodden, very well understood path to finding as best as we can to truth, or some true thing about the world. And it's very rigorous. It involves peer review. It involves literature review. It involves people, being open to having every part of their theory scrutinized and blasted. And I mean, that's what it's about. So here's my question. Two-part question. The first is kind of address this issue of research and how important that is in the QAnon community, and what that might look like and what they might mean by that. And I know you've talked about the Q drops. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's what their research is, or maybe there's something beyond that. And then why do you I'm very empathetic or sympathetic to what you're saying. I don't believe in QAnon. But tell us why it's wrong. Why should we feel like this isn't true? Because they're so convinced, and they would say, do your research, as if I did my research, I would find out that this is true. So I'm stupid, or it's almost like I don't have to answer you. You just don't. It's like this bringing this air of legitimacy. So does that make sense? So why is this wrong? But what what place does research have in this in QAnon, and what do they mean by that, and why
Sure,
isn't
that's
this true?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's a phrase that is thrown around constantly in Q, and now, I mean, certainly with the anti-vax movement, this idea of do your research. What they mean 99% of the time is read the things that I've already read, watch the videos I've already watched, listen to the podcasts I've already listened to, and agree with me. There is no method to it. It has nothing to do with actual scientific theorizing of following possibilities and eliminating them, and the thing that is left is the thing that is most likely true. That's not what they mean at all, because they already have come to their conclusion. They've come to their conclusion based on they want it to be real. They want Q to be real. They want ivermectin to be the magical cure-all for COVID. This is what they want to believe. And so everything that they will consume will be something that already leads back to that. They're not open to new interpretation. They're not open to new findings. They're not open to being wrong. Trying to tell a Q believer that they're wrong is just going to make them think that they're more right. They don't have any interest in being wrong. And so that's why it's not actual research, because they've already made up their mind. They've jumped to the conclusion, and they're working backwards to justify it, which is the actual opposite of how actual research works. And there's a lot of kind of connecting of dots that don't connect. It's, this guy was in this place at this certain time, and then Trump tweeted this other thing. It's there's a lot of like knitting crumbs together to make bread, except that's not how you make bread. That's like, if you take a bunch of crumbs and put them together, you don't have bread. You just have a bunch of crumbs. So it's really the opposite of how research works. And I would say that if somebody were to genuinely ask me, like, prove QAnon is not real, well, that's actually, again, the opposite of how scientific research works. It's not about proving something is not real. It's about proving that it is real. I would say that the Q believer has to prove to me that it's real, and that they have to do that not through dozens of sort of half-baked proofs, but by one genuine, legitimate piece of evidence. And one of the things that I do in the book is I go through the legitimate pieces of evidence that have been thrown at me throughout the years to try to prove that Q is real. And there's a couple of them that are sort of brought up over and over and over again. I'm not going to get into all of them because it gets really complicated. But even those,
and we want people to read your book,
right? Exactly.
But can you give us one or two, maybe?
Sure. I'll talk about the John McCain one. So, and I go into this quite a bit in the book. There is a belief among Q believers that John McCain's death was predicted by Q down to the minute when it would happen. And so what the Q believers say is that is mathematically impossible for that to be a coincidence. It is proof that Q knew that John McCain not only would die, but would be executed, and when exactly it would happen, and the symbolic value of when that would happen. And the Q believers go to a couple of pieces of very half-baked proof. And one of them is a picture that Q posted of John McCain speaking at an event with his hands up and his eyes closed, like in like mid-thought. And the Q drop reads No Name, which is Q's nickname for John McCain. Like they hated him so much they wouldn't even use his name. No Name returning to headlines. And then a month later, McCain died. And there was another reference that Q made to every dog has its day. And supposedly John McCain died on National Dog Day. Proof that Q engineered this whole thing, had McCain executed exactly 30 days later, because another Q catchphrase is done in 30. So you have the done in 30, you have returning to headlines, you have the exact time down to the minute when McCain's death was announced, and you have National Dog Day. Put all that together, and it's absolutely incontrovertible proof that Q knew exactly when McCain would be executed. Except that's all wrong. First of all Q said about McCain is that he would be returning to the headlines. Never said a word about him dying. John McCain was a really well-known senator, a really well-known opponent of Donald Trump, was also known to be really sick. Returning to headlines could mean anything. Could mean resigning from the Senate, retiring, switching parties, whatever. Just saying returning to headlines is the kind of very cheap shotgunning prediction that a strip mall psychic makes. It's impossible to refute it because at some point it's going to happen. So the other things are not correct as well. McCain didn't actually die on National Dog Day. He died the day before National Dog Day. The done in 30, McCain didn't die 30 days after that Q post. He died 31 days after that Q post. If you examine it, it all falls apart almost immediately. And this is really like the most compelling proof that Q is actually real. And it's really not that compelling. So if you walk people through, okay, not just this is fake, anybody who believes in this is stupid, but here's why it falls apart. Here are the problems. And of course the Q believers are going to go, well, that's just your interpretation or blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't matter. Once you've falsified it, there's no going back, and it's never applicable again. So I would say that the proof that Q is fake is simply the fact that nothing Q talks about really ever happens in the way that Q talks about it. This is just very vague. It's very unspecific. It's the exact way that like a TV psychic like John Edward worked, where he would say, you're thinking about somebody close to you, your father, brother, mother, sister. And you go, oh, my mother. Well, they didn't predict that. They just throw out a bunch of words and let you confirm it for them. That's exactly how Q works.
So wild. So I want to go back to my earlier question, just because this is more of just of a curiosity of mine about like, what's the significance of like JFK and the lizard people? Because like it's something I keep hearing come up, and maybe that's kind of part of what you're explaining earlier about these are just ideas that exist in the bowels of 4chan or something like that.
Sure. And the thing about Q is that you really don't find a lot that's new in it. It's a repurposing of things that have been around a while. So the lizard people control the world. That's been around for a long time. That's a David Icke thing, who was pushing that stuff for decades. That all of the world's elites are actually lizard aliens, and you can tell when if you look at a still frame a certain way and they like their head changes shape. I mean, just ridiculous stuff. The JFK Jr. thing is really interesting because it's been in the news for a while because you have this group in Dallas who is still there waiting for JFK Jr. to return. JFK Jr. was actually only brought up once in a Q drop, and it actually had nothing to do with him still being alive. So it's a really good example of how so much of the Q mythology that we have come to understand or not understand, it came from other sources, came from other people, came from other, followers of this movement. Q mentioned JFK Jr. only once, insinuating, and of course it's completely bonkers, insinuating that Hillary Clinton had him killed in his 1999 plane crash to get him out of the way so she could run for the Senate. Now, again, simple facts completely falsify this. JFK Jr.'s plane crash was pilot error. It's the same kind of error that many, many other plane crashes have happened. Pilot just gets too far out of the water, they get disoriented, they run out of fuel, they lose, they run into a mountain. That stuff happens quite often. Also, JFK Jr. had not actually announced he was running for the Senate. He was talking about it privately to friends. There was no campaign for Hillary Clinton to put a stop to. It's not even confirmed if he was ever going to actually do it. So that mention happens just one time, and it's really much more about Hillary Clinton's so evil that she engineered this plane crash. Whatever. People ran with JFK Jr. being alive because they wanted him to return to come back and sweep away the Clintons and join Trump in his great crusade. Q was actually asked, whether JFK Jr. was alive, and Q said no. But of course, you can't really trust anything Q says, because in a very early drop, Q said disinformation is necessary, meaning sometimes I will lie to you, and it's only in the service of the greater truth. So, one of really the most ingenious things Q ever did was to say, hey, some of this is going to be pure nonsense, and you're never going to know what's real and what's not real. So you just have to keep reading. Just like pure cult leader stuff. Mm-hmm. So the JFK Jr. thing comes from people outside of the Q drops bringing their own bizarre beliefs to this movement and realizing that there is no belief too bizarre to not be welcomed under the big tent of QAnon.
Now, so what role does Ron Watkins play in the whole Q universe, and why should I not be donating to his congressional campaign in Arizona?
Well, the Ron Watkins congressional campaign is not raising a lot of money. In fact, most of it came from a loan from his dad. So you hopefully have better things to do with your money, like anything, like burn it rather than give it to Ron Watkins' campaign. Ron was the administrator of 8chan. His father, Jim, owned the board. He bought it from Fred Brennan, who created 8chan. And then, of course, later disavowed it and basically spent years trying to get it taken down, and eventually did get it taken down. So Ron was the administrator of 8chan. And then when 8chan went down in summer of 2019, he was one of the people who was trying to bring it back, working with a bunch of very dodgy internet service providers and online security providers until they finally brought it back as 8kun, which is where Q made the rest of their drops through the rest of 2019 and 2020. So on election day 2020, Ron announced that he was resigning as the administrator of 8kun to what did he say? To pursue his woodworking passion and write a book about constitutional law. Now, I don't know if there's anybody who knows less about constitutional law than Ron Watkins, and I don't know what his woodworking skill is like. I can't speak to that. But Ron immediately reinvented himself on the fly as an expert in voting machines. He got his hands on a user's manual for a Dominion voting systems vote tabulation system, and decided that he knew exactly how it worked, what all the vulnerabilities were, and how to exploit them. So this was right around the time, of course, when Q began to ramp down in the drops, and there were really just a couple made after Election Day. Now, if you look at Ron's tweets up until he got booted off of Twitter after the insurrection, they read exactly like Q drops. They have the same cadence. They have the same language style. I mean, you can look at this and go, this is the same person who is doing this. And of course, I asked Ron about it. He's like, I don't know anything about QAnon. That's your job to know what that is. Okay, Ron, sure. But Ron basically reinvented himself and found mainstream stardom. Within a couple of weeks, he's getting retweeted about half a dozen times by President Trump. He's getting interviewed on OAN, and they're dominionizing the vote special that, of course, Trump is tweeting that too. He's become this kind of new media superstar because everybody kind of knows that he was involved in Q, but there's just enough plausible deniability there of him saying, well, I don't know anything about Q. That's just a thing people like that was on the board. It's not me. I know nothing about that. It's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Everybody kind of knows that it's not true, but there's just enough lack of proof there that he can legitimately say that, but also grift off of the people who were really, really deep into Q. So Ron Watkins is a very important figure to understand in the evolution of Q, but he's just one sort of star in this galaxy of grifters and trolls and operators who made this world come alive.
Oh my goodness. It's just amazing to have you on. It's so convoluted and it's just amazing to hear, because I'm pretty sure I've heard Ron Watkins quoted to me or told to me as an expert that I should be looking at to understand different things about the voting issues or stuff like that.
No.
So
no.
My question, so with Trump, All right, Trump. Do you think he was intentionally like playing into this Q thing? I mean, that's what he was doing. So what, and again, I know can't read his mind, you don't know his heart, but what do you imagine were the motivations there? What would that have done for him? Like, why would someone do that?
I think it's always really hard to tell what Trump knew and what he didn't know and what was just put in front of him. I think it is undeniable that people in his circle knew exactly what QAnon was and exactly how to make the best use of it. His social media guy, Dan Scavino, was constantly throwing out little hints about Q and Q drops and some of the stuff in Q and Q memes. There was a point in March 2020, right as the pandemic was starting to hit, where Trump retweeted a Q meme of him playing a violin with the text, "Nothing can stop what's coming" underneath it, which is a Q catchphrase. And he says, "I don't know what it means, but it sounds good to me." Well, I mean, whether or not he knew what it meant is debatable, but the people in his orbit whose job it was to know what it meant, they knew exactly what it meant. And of course, when Trump was finally asked about Q, he really knew what it was. He said, "Well, I don't know much about it, but I heard they're fighting pedophiles." Well, that's kind of what they think that they were doing. So it's clear that he had some understanding of what it was.
Hilarious.
And I think that he saw it and his people saw it as a resource that they could exploit, as a very fervent group of believers who very vocally supported him, very vocally supported what he stood for, whatever that was, and who knew how to use social media in a very adaptable way. And of course, who also had a lot of money to throw at him. These were people who were buying Q books, buying Q t-shirts, subscribing to Q podcasts. This was a resource that could be tapped. And of course, even now post-Trump, we're still seeing it. We're seeing people like Michael Flynn, like Sidney Powell, like Lynn Wood, those people who are in that Trump orbit, especially at the end with the Stop the Steal movement. These are people who are venerated and revered by QAnon believers who have no problem giving their money to their causes. Michael Flynn has millions of dollars in legal bills. Sidney Powell has millions of dollars in legal bills from all of this Stop the Steal stuff. Trump isn't paying that. Somebody needs to pay it. So why not grift off the Q people? Why not speak at these conferences? Why not sell t-shirts and books and all this other branded stuff? So Q believers are a resource for people like Trump and people in his inner circle. And it's a resource that can be tapped fairly easily and without a lot of expense.
Man, that's really good. I have one more quick question. Where can we find like a list, and maybe it's just in your book, so it'd be a great plug for your book, but of just Q drops, like a chronological list of Q drops?
Sure. They're still up. There's a couple of aggregator sites, and there was actually the development of these aggregator sites that was a big jump forward in the Q movement, because at that point you didn't have to go to 4chan anymore. You could go to one of these places like QMap, that's not around anymore, and they would list out what the drops were, and they had discussion boards and all these other places. The one I go to is qposts.online. It's a very simple text-based sort of repository of all the Q drops. But I would say that at this point, it's not quite so important to understand the drops anymore, because so many people who are coming to this mythology don't know anything about Q. And Q itself really isn't the same movement that it was when the drops were coming out. It's much more based around sort of post-election conspiracy theories, the COVID conspiracy theories, stolen election conspiracy theories, cancel culture stuff, stuff that's really driving far-right discourse in 2022. This is not stuff that's generally mentioned in Q drops. Now, there's a lot of material there about the election, and it's very clear that Q was really priming believers for Trump's loss in the election, which, people could see coming. I mean, the polling was there from the beginning that Biden was going to outdo Trump. It was just a question of how well he did in some of these swing states. But Q was prepping Q believers to believe that the election was stolen, and that the only way Biden could win is if the deep state stepped in and, unleashed their middle of the night ballot dumps and all this other stuff. And Trump was talking about that. Trump spent months talking about that. None of this was new. None of this was just made up on the spot. This was all laid out as a way to soften the blow of Trump losing. So if you really want to understand kind of where we are now, definitely reading kind of the drops, especially in like September and October when it gets really, really frenetic. But there's a lot in the Q drops that just doesn't make any sense. That's just completely inscrutable. And there's also a fair amount of anti-Semitism. There's a fair amount of racism. There's some really, really hideously awful memes that Q boosts. So I would caution people to not just kind of willy-nilly try to read the drops to understand what's going on. But if you want to jump in at the end there is a lot there to chew on that really explains kind of where we are and why this conspiracy octopus has grown so big.
Have there been any, threats to your life or work, persons? I'd imagine, kind of wading in sort of the Q waters, you probably make a lot of Q enemies. Is that accurate?
It's, it actually hasn't been that bad. I take some basic steps to protect myself. I've scrubbed all my identifying info from places like white pages and stuff like that. I don't talk about my family on social media. Like I don't even use my kids' names in the acknowledgments of the book. If people want to find me, it's probably not that hard, but I've made it hard enough that you actually need to put a little bit of work into it. I get some trolling and some harassment, but I would say that the trolling and harassment I do get is substantially less than what any woman or any person of color in any public facing job gets on a daily basis. I have it fairly easy in that respect. The last name is probably the single biggest crank magnet that I have. And then it's like, well, the real Rothschilds are not on Twitter arguing with people. They're just like busy being rich. So it's, that kind of deflates that stuff. But it's definitely something I watch out for, but it's been fairly manageable.
That's good. Now, so my last question, being that you are deeply immersed in conspiracy theories, to include Q. Are there any conspiracy theories that you know of that you either one wish were true or has more likelihood than not to be true, but just hasn't been proven true? And I'm thinking like I'll just say for myself, like I wish there were aliens.
Sure.
I think that would be really cool and really neat, but we just don't have any objective information to say that aliens exist. So for you, like, what are some conspiracy theories that you either wish were true or think could be true?
Well, the one that I always come back to as my kind of favorite conspiracy theory, because I think the explanation of it is actually really interesting, is the mattress store conspiracy. And what this is people started to notice, maybe really around like 2014 or 2015, that there was every city has a certain street or a certain intersection where there are like 8 mattress stores. There's a mattress firm across from a sit and sleep, and there's a Sleepy Town down the street, and then another mattress firm. People are like, why are there so many mattress stores? What is really going on here? Is this a money laundering thing? Is this a drug running thing? Is this like snapping up real estate so that they can build their internment camps on? And then, people are like, well, nobody's ever in them, and there's never any staff there, and they're open all the time. They're like, what's going on here? So it's a classic example of there is something here that does not really make any sense. And people default to the more salacious explanation for it. But in reality, the explanation really says a lot about kind of how big business works. So what's going on here is that these stores are really all owned by the same company, and they're all owned by Mattress Firm. And mattresses are fairly inexpensive to make, and they're massively marked up. So a mattress that costs a couple $100 to make will be marked up for $2,000 or $3,000. So these stores also have very little overhead. They don't keep mattresses on site, and they really only have like 2 people working in them. So the overhead is very small. So you really only have to sell like 1, maybe 2 mattresses a day to keep these stores afloat. And that's why there are so many of them, because they're all owned by the same company. You don't like the offer you're getting at Sit and Sleep. You walk across the street to Mattress Firm. You think you have the illusion of choice. Well, you don't. You don't have any choice. It's all the same company. And of course, Mattress Firm lost a lot of money buying up all these stores and then had to close a bunch of them. So there really is an actual explanation for why there are so many mattress stores on the same block. It's just not a conspiracy theory. It's just how business works. So there's a really fascinating sort of nugget of truth in a much more salacious story. And that to me is where digging into conspiracy theories is fun. You know, there's no stakes to it. You know, there's no like mass execution at the end of it. It's just like, okay, what is the chicanery that this company is trying to pull, and how can we expose it? And it's fun. It's actually sort of enjoyable to think about things like that.
That's so cool. Well, man, Mike, we have so many more questions, but we're going to have to close it out here. And we just really appreciate everything. I guess one final thing would be, you know, we have a lot of different people that are on this, that listen to our podcast. What do you think is one thing you would want to say to them? Maybe not just about QAnon, but even conspiracy theories in general. Like what is something you feel like a concise thing that you would want them to hear from you?
Sure. I would say that just in general, not with QAnon in particular, people believe conspiracy theories for good reasons. You know, the idea that powerful people are getting away with things that we can't get away with and never face justice, that's true. We've seen that time and time again. You know, the idea that big business conspires to get one over on us and hide the potentially harmful effects of some of their products and some of their doings, that's true too. We know that. So being a conspiracy theory believer doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you, doesn't mean you're crazy, doesn't mean you need help. It just means that you are seeing something and looking for a more palatable explanation for it. We all do that. We do that when, our team loses a game that they should have won. We go, well, it's not that they didn't play badly. It's that the refs cheated us out of it, or they tanked it on purpose, or whatever. That's a completely healthy, completely anodyne belief in a conspiracy. There's no harm there. There's nothing to do about that. And for most people, that's where conspiracy theory belief ends. It's just a way of trying to explain things. For a few people, it really curdles into a much more toxic, much more violent, a much more adversarial way of looking at the world. And so that's where I really kind of do my work. But for most people, it's totally fine to just idly believe that the mafia killed Kennedy, or, hey, we didn't actually land on the moon. There's no harm in that. And there's nothing to do about that. And it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you.
That's great. Thanks so much for bringing that to our attention. And thanks so much for coming on today, Mike. It's been such an enjoyable conversation. It'll probably go down as my favorite one of the year, is my guess.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you.
Already predicting for the next year. And so you have several books, and people can find those on Amazon. Is there another place they should go to find your books or your work?
Yeah, you can get my stuff on bookshop.org, Amazon, directly through the publisher. For The Storm Is Upon Us, you can get the hardcover. We're working on a paperback that's going to have an afterword. That'll be out over the summer probably. It's an audiobook. It's a Kindle. You can find me on Twitter, Rothschild MD. I am not a doctor. Those are just my initials. Another thing people go, oh, you're a doctor. Like, no, that's just my initials. Sorry. I'm not that interesting. And that's where I put out the majority of my work. And yeah, there's going to be more stuff coming from me in the near future. So I hope to meet a lot of new folks there.
Yeah, well, great. Thank you so much. And guys, you heard it. You can go check out his stuff. We encourage you to do that. And we appreciate it. And The Storm Is Coming. remember. But it's probably just the rain that's going to come happen here in a few minutes. But who knows? You know what I mean? Hey, thanks so much, Mike. You have